the Executive Officer of the Australian Archaeological Institute of Athens, who will speak to us on archaeology and identity, Australians, Greeks and Gallipoli.
Αξιότιμοι καλεσμένοι, καλησπέρα σας. Ευχαριστώ πολύ τους φίλους των Anzac της Λίμνου για την πρόσκληση αυτή να παρευρεθώ εδώ απόψε. Firstly, let me begin by congratulating the organizers of this conference for their initiative in promoting the World War I importance of Lemnos and thanking them for the privilege of including me and my colleagues at the Australian Archaeological Institute of Athens in this endeavour. It is a great honour to be here on this beautiful and historically significant island. My paper in this conference may stand out as somewhat different from the majority of those being presented. This is because I'm neither a military or naval historian, nor am I prepared to comment on the undoubted importance of Lemnos in the First World War, and more specifically, the Gallipoli campaign. Instead, as an archaeologist and a representative of the Australian Archaeological Institute at Athens, the AAIA, I seek to discuss the potential role that archaeology and archaeological research and publication can play in the broader understanding of the importance of Lemnos in these significant events, and the role of the AAIA as a potential facilitator in the organization and realization of such archaeological activity. The Australian Archaeological Institute at Athens is in fact ideally placed to provide such leadership, in part because it is an academic institution whose primary purpose is to promote the research of Australian archaeologists working in Greece and the wider Mediterranean area in all periods of the past, from remote prehistory through the classical period and up to the present. Also, the subject matter, that is Lemnos during World War I, is certainly of considerable interest to Australian scholars, especially because of its Anzac connection and the role it played in the Gallipoli campaign. While the importance of Gallipoli for Australia is generally understood by individuals from outside Australia, the depth of that feeling and its fundamental significance can hardly be fully understood by non-Australians. Lemnos, as the island situated in the non-combat zone, as opposed to the Gallipoli Peninsula inside a war zone, may help provide a new and refreshing dimension in the discourse of Australia's role of in World War I, and foster a dialogue with some of the other direct and indirect players involved in the campaign, including the Greeks. An archaeological investigation of the sites and monuments associated with the World War I history of Lemnos would add considerably in illuminating aspects of the Great War that are often overlooked, as well as aiding in the preservation of both tangible and non-tangible reminders of this significant world event. Memory and identity are two of the main themes implicated in such events, and archaeology can provide insightful ways in dealing with these. Thus, my paper will begin by providing a quick overview of the history of the AAIA and its sponsorship of projects that have similarities to what may be envisioned in the case of Lemnos. It will then continue by making some specific suggestions of how the Institute may assist with the initial design of a research proposal and method that would best address the importance of Lemnos during World War I, as well as with the practical field implementation of such and examples of projects sponsored by the AAIA. In more general terms, as an Australian institution, the staff and members of the Australian Institute can help all those appropriately qualified Australian and Australian-based researchers who aim to provide insights into the importance of World War I, and more specifically the Gallipoli campaign and its generally disastrous outcome, as a fundamental nation-building series of events that helped in the transition of Australia from a group of distant British colonies to a nation with a strong sense of its own distinct culture and an important place in the modern world. First, let me take a step back. You know? Take a step back and tell you some of the history and background of our organization. The AAIA was established in 1980 through the University of Sydney, but under Greek law as one of the 17 foreign schools in Athens. These foreign schools were founded in Greece by different nations to represent scholars wishing to work in Greece. Australian archaeological fieldwork in Greece is undertaken with permission of the Greek government under our institute's auspices. The AAIA exists to make representations to the Greek Ministry of Culture on behalf of Australian archaeologists, negotiate excavation permits, and to provide archaeological support services such as scholarship, library access, and accommodation. The older foreign schools, such as the German, British, French, and American schools, are gigantic research institutions with major budgets. The Australian Institute, although smaller and younger, is growing and manages to hold its own among this august group of institutions. The AIA's creation was the vision of the foundation director of the AAIA, Professor Alexander Kambitoglou, who understood the importance of an independent Australian presence in Greece and how that presence would ensure that Australian research could continue in this country. He had already initiated the first Australian excavation in Greece at Zagora on Andros, and then went on to excavate the major site of Toroni in northern Greece. Both these sites remain connected to the Institute, and their archaeological investigation is a collaborative project with the Archeologiki Eteria. Most of the other foreign schools are funded by their government's foreign affairs or education departments. The AAIA, however, is not government funded, but relies solely on the support of its members. Institutionally, we have as members every major university in our subject area, as well as a range of private high schools. Friends societies in each Australian state are active in organising events, scholarship and fundraising programs. The staff work to engage our national and international member base through educational events and public programs, most notably an Australian-wide visiting professorship lecture tour that annually brings a major international scholar to visit the Friends, the university departments, and the schools that support us. More generally, our members vary in nature, being organizations, museums, community groups, businesses, individuals, students, and academics. Our wide membership base is testimony to the respect that the Australian public holds for our educational mission. Our presence in Athens gives us a strong base in what is one of the most important centres for archaeological research in the world. From this base, Australian scholars and archaeologists are able to network internationally on a number of levels. Our extended fieldwork projects provide Australian students the practical experience they need for successful careers and opportunities to connect with others on the international academic circuit. The Institute tries to capture the value of its research and pass it on in ways that can educate and inform every member, whether they're a school student or a professor. In dealing with the realities of the present world, our Institute has had to be entrepreneurial in order to raise the necessary funds to survive and nurture our archaeological mission. But archaeological research, its facilitation and publication is our core competency, and we are certainly in a position to provide advice and direction to projects such as in the case of potential future archaeological work in Lemnos. Let me say more about the methods involved. As is generally known, archaeological research can involve a wide variety of approaches. the best known being systematic archaeological survey, or I should say archaeological excavation. This approach, however, is frequently destructive in nature, and it is also extremely expensive, normally involving the purchase of land either by the state or by research institutions themselves. In the case of Lemnos, almost certainly it would be reasonable to propose a broadly based approach involving a wide variety of methods. This kind of project would involve a team of specialists from a variety of disciplines, including archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, heritage specialists, and others who would contribute to the research objectives set out by the research agenda. Archaeological fieldwork should be combined with ethnographic investigation and historical archival research, which can provide supplementary and/or contradictory information to enrich our knowledge of the island during a specific period in time, that is during World War I. Chief among these methods would presumably be systematic but carefully targeted archaeological survey in which areas that have already been identified as the sites of World War I installations are already known to have existed on Lemnos. This would be carried out using non-destructive means, most commonly carried out by teams of specialists and usually students who walk in carefully organized transects across the sites, making note of humanly modified landscapes, buildings, roads, artifacts lying on the surface, as well as other features that would help us understand the use of specific places of importance in the period of World War I in the Eastern Mediterranean. Such preliminary investigation is likely to uncover a new information about activity on Lemnos, much of it undoubtedly not previously known and of academic value. After this phase of investigation, other techniques would presumably be utilized, perhaps involving non-destructive non-destructive methods such as ground-penetrating radar, electronic resistivity exploration, as well as highly targeted excavation and other methods. Such an interdisciplinary and as much as possible non-destructive approach would surely help in determining what sites are to be developed as educational and tourist attractions, aiming at bringing Lemnos' recent past to the attention of the wider community, like the case has been made in Gallipoli. The role of the Australian Archaeological Institute in such undertakings would certainly not be to carry them out by itself and by its staff alone. Rather, the role of the Institute would be to encourage various research institutions, especially universities and individual researchers in Australia, to develop research projects and parts of such projects as part of a broad-based archaeological investigation of Lemnos in the period of World War I. It would thus act as an instigator and facilitator in such a program by helping bring together various potential contributors in this endeavor and using the experience of its staff to help them collaborate effectively. This collaborative effort would naturally involve the Greek state, research specialists and universities, and research centres in Australia, Greece, and other countries. As mentioned above, the Australian Institute has a long history of such international research activity, and it stands ready to help facilitate such research on Lemnos, and as well to act as a good faith negotiator and a disinterested collaborator in the evaluation of the suggested research capabilities of individuals and institutions that might be involved. Furthermore, the Institute's success in helping well-planned out and appropriately staffed projects in obtaining necessary government permits has been demonstrated in similar research programs elsewhere in Greece. However, it is important to bear in mind that the Institute is not in a position to provide financial support for programs of this type, and that the programs themselves must secure required funding on their own. I would like to close this presentation with a couple of examples of projects that the AAIA has successfully supported in the past. The Australian Payokora-Kithira Archaeological Survey, or APCAS, and the Zavora Archaeological Project, ZAP. From 1999 to 2003, APCAS was engaged in a diachronic survey of the northern part of the island of Kithira, focusing on the area surrounding the medieval settlement of Agios Dimitrios, Payokora. The primary investigators of this project were mainly from the University of Sydney in Australia and the Ohio State University in the United States, and the team consisted of specialists from various other institutions from both Australia and overseas, collaborating with the local Greek Archaeological Service. Both intensive and extensive archaeological survey techniques were employed, alongside historical, anthropological, geomorphological, and archival research as required for each of the periods investigated. Archaeologically speaking, one of the most underrepresented periods of Kithira's history is the period of the British Mandate of the Ionian Islands from 1815 to 1864. In an attempt to understand the complexity of the relationship between the British officers that served on the island during this time and the local population, I undertook a study of the British military cemeteries in Kithira as a sub-project of APCAS, even though these cemeteries are physically located outside the boundaries of the survey area that was under investigation. A combination of archival research, archaeological field investigations, and oral histories helped me in identifying the location of the cemeteries within the churchyard of St. Martin, a former Catholic church converted to Anglican rite. And you can see what it looks like today. Okay. A study of the surviving tombstones and their inscriptions contributed in illuminating aspects of the social and military history of the island during this particular time period. It is noteworthy to mention that in 1935, the remains of the individuals buried in what is at least assumed to be the Anglican cemetery were removed and placed in a communal vault in the new Demotikon and Orthodoxo cemetery to the northeast, established in 1896. The commemorative plaques, which were formerly in the churchyard, were subsequently removed and placed in the Kithira Archaeological Museum. And this is what remains of the space where those plaques used to be. The site thus reverted to the community. A plaque documenting this event was placed inside the now ruined church of St. Martin by the Hellenic British League in 1971. Needless to say, such commemorative actions are examples of the interplay of memory and identity mentioned earlier, and Lemnos certainly has a good share of these that are of significance to various different groups. Considerations of memory and identity also loom large in the Australian Institute's work with Zavora on the island of Andros. An Australian team first undertook excavations at this important early Iron Age settlement site in the late 1960s and 70s, under the direction of Professor Alexander Kambiroglou of the University of Sydney, and subsequently the founder of the Australian Institute. These campaigns predated the establishment of the Institute and were conducted under the aegis of the Archaeologική Εταιρεία. In 2012, an Australian team, co-directed by Professor Margaret Miller, Associate Professor Leslie Beaumont, and Dr. Stavros Paspalas, returned to Zagora as a collaborative project between the Australian Institute and the Εταιρεία. And just a little bit of background about Zagora. It is renowned amongst classical archaeologists as being the most extensively preserved site of the 9th and 8th centuries BC in the Aegean. And it has brought to light some very important evidence for that period. The settlement was abandoned in 700 BC and it was never reoccupied, and this fact explains the excellent state of preservation of its buildings. The one exception was a settlement sanctuary area. Clearly, as Stavros Paspalas has pointed out, the archaeological record testifies to the memory of this holy place continuing for a good number of generations. Indeed, the latest cultic activity at the temple was dated by Kambiroglou to the 5th century. Paspalas has stressed the importance that the post-settlement period memory of Zagora may have played on the island. As he notes, it cannot be taken for granted that those who remembered were indeed descendants of the settlement's inhabitants, though this may well have been the case. The possibility, however, must also be noted that others may have appropriated the site for their own purposes. The ruinous town may have been perceived to hold potent cultural associations to which individuals and groups not otherwise linked with it may have wished to associate themselves. We must always remember that the past and its physical remains are liable to be recast, reinterpreted, and revalorized. Given that the area around the settlement has and had agricultural potential, groups who may have wished to exploit these resources could readily lay claim to them by continuing to recognize the sanctity of the old sanctuary and making their association with it clear for all to see by attending to its maintenance and conducting their rituals there. In so doing, they also cemented their ties with the region and so created and further elaborated on an aspect of their identity. Religion, economics, and identity all mix against the backdrop of a wider social milieu that leaves its traces in the landscape. This is not a phenomenon restricted to antiquity, and one may ask similar questions relating to memory and identity in more recent periods. The Zagora project is just one example, albeit chronologically removed from the World War I that we're discussing today and the Gallipoli campaign, that nicely illustrates what archaeological research has to offer regarding memory and the uses it can be put to. In particular, it highlights the contribution, these are just some finds from Zagora. In particular, it highlights the contribution that material remains can make to our understanding of the past and how the past is interpreted in later periods. This is no small matter in our appreciation of Gallipoli, and particularly the changing ways it has been understood over the past century in Australia and New Zealand to restrict ourselves to the Antipodean combatants. Today, largely forgotten, the World War I standing remains and the relevant information collected through surface survey on Lemnos will undoubtedly add considerable further scientific data to the Gallipoli portfolio, as well as contributing to the fuller picture that interested non-specialists will be able to form. To a great degree, the Gallipoli campaign, debacle many would say, is one of the main pillars of contemporary Australian and New Zealand identity, at least that version of it embraced by significant sectors of those respective societies. A far more nuanced appreciation of what the campaign actually involved will interest many, as well as forming an important component on how it is understood by generations to come. A shift in focus from the actual front line will bring other important aspects to the fore, such as details relating to the provisioning infrastructure required by the Entente Allied fighting forces, as well as the role played by the hospital camps on Lemnos, the doctors and nurses, individuals who, like the Anzac soldiers, traveled across the globe to participate in what they considered to be their patriotic duty. Well-designed research projects that focus on the World War I material remains on Lemnos will both contribute to our understanding of how the Great War impacted on the local community, but it will also allow a more nuanced appreciation of the campaign itself. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για την πρόταση που καταθέσατε.